fifth session of this series. We're very pleased to have Meryem, who's come over from Oxford, and she'll be talking to us today. At the end, once she finishes speaking, we'll have some music, followed by a Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. It's wonderful that you came, even though the weather is so nice outside. I am at Oxford, and I'm the director and the founder of the Oxford Network for Armenian Genocide Studies. This is the first of such networks in the UK. And I think it's really, really important that we have such a network in an institution like University of Oxford. And if you like, after my talk, we can talk a little bit about the legacy of the University of Oxford when it comes to research on the Armenian genocide. This is a legacy that is more than 120 years old, and I can tell you a little bit more about it. But today, for the talk, is I am about to publish my third book, and the book is called Reading Silences, Essays on Women, Memory and War. And I hope to come back to here and show you the book and maybe read another essay. But today I wanted to read you the first essay of the book. It's the first time that I'm reading this essay. It's an extremely important essay for me because it is an essay about a woman, as you will hear, who died in Der Sor in 1916. But the essay is also about what genocide does to us. And it will give you a definition of genocide. I chose the format of essays in my book because if you write essays, it gives you a possibility of thinking what it means to you. And I really wanted to think what that legacy of the genocide means to me. I come from Turkey, I'm half Turkish and, half from Turkey, half from Germany. And it was really important that for me to take a political stance. So it's not an academic essay, it's not an academic article or book chapter, but it's a personal essay. After my talk, usually I know that it is, I guess it's the custom to give applause after a talk, but I always say, because I'm a genocide scholar, I always say during my talks, please don't applaud, because I'm talking about human tragedy and genocide, and we shall never applaud such tragedies. Instead, I hope that you will join me in silence for a short prayer of those lives that we have lost during the genocide. So we will have a few minutes of silence after my talk, and then we will have a song that Misak will play for us. This essay is difficult for me. It's really A few years ago, I took a course at Woodbrook Quaker Centre in Birmingham, in England. On my first day at Woodbrook, I was wandering around the library, thinking about the days ahead, when by sheer accident, I found a small brass plaque. It read, Araxia Jebijan, Woodbrook student, 1912, martyr in the Armenian massacres of 1915. The librarian had already left, so I had to wait until the next morning to ask her about the plague in Araxia Jebijan. Yes, there was a student called Araxia Jebijan at Woodbrook in 1912, and she was killed by the Turks during the Armenian massacres, the librarian Betty Haglund told me. Had I heard about what happened to the Armenians during World War I? I had indeed, I told her. That morning, amidst power shortages and other unexpected interruptions, Betty Haglund and I went on a search to find out more about Araxia. We found some photographs picturing Araxia among her classmates at Woodbrook, a few of her essays that she had written at Woodbrook, and several letters she wrote to her teachers at Woodbrook between 1912 and 1913. We also found a letter and a small note documenting what happened to Araxia during the Armenian Genocide of 1915. It is from these documents that we learned that Araxia did not have to die. The letter said, "About Araxia Jebijan, I'm sorry to say, no word has come from here. She has been put into a prison in Deir Zor for the only reason that she had distributed relief money to the poor people there. There's little hope for her, and still we have to wait more. How much? I told her that she should stay here in Aintab, at the American Girls' School, but she refused and went willingly to suffer with her people." In the 4 surviving letters that Araxia wrote from the Deir Zor death camps, passed down to us in German diplomatic correspondence, Araxia describes a tragedy so great, she writes, it cannot be described sufficiently, neither in words nor in writing. The people are slaughtering and eating stray dogs. Recently, they have even slaughtered a dying man, she continues, and ate him. That is what I was told by an eyewitness. One woman cut off her hair to sell it for bread. I saw how a woman ate the dried blood of a dead animal on the street. Up to now, they all ate grass, but that has also dried up. Last week, we were in a house where the inhabitants had not eaten for 3 days. The woman held a small child in her arms and tried to give it some breadcrumbs. But the child was so weak it couldn't swallow anymore. So it choked and died in her arms. At that moment, this is Araxia, went up to her with G. We gave her £1, the woman took it. Then in a flood of tears she cried out, "Oh, if you only would have come yesterday, my child would still be alive." Another family went to bed hungry. The child could not sleep and shouted out for bread. Finally, the Arab landlord took mercy and gave the child a piece of bread. The child took it and held it tightly. First it wanted to bite into it. Then it thought for a moment and said, "If I eat it now, I will be hungry again tomorrow." And with the secure feeling of having bread close by, went to sleep. "Oh, my dear sister, my pen is not capable of describing the misery, the poverty," Araxia describes in another letter. "Only one thought fills my heart. Who can bring relief to this wretched situation, and who can portray a picture of our condition to those who tolerate such violence and permit it?" Araxia's letters are simply addressed to my dear sister. The sister Araxia refers to here is the sister Beatrice Röhner, a Swiss nun working for a German missionary organization whom Araxia first met as a 15-year-old girl in her hometown of Aintab. I met her as a girl who still wanted to go to school. All the girls of the same age were already or were about to get married, Beatrice Röhner would later write about their first meeting. But not so Araxia. She wanted to learn. She first went to a school in Aintab and then came to Marash to study at the college run by the American Mission. As a student in Marash, Araxia would spend most of her afternoons visiting Beatrice Röhner at the orphanage, where they later cared for local orphans. I was so happy, what a great example and inspiration she was going to be for the other women in Turkey. After finishing school, she was allowed to go to England for 2 years, where she found a loving home with a Quaker family. The year spent there was an incredible time of personal growth, and she came back full of joy and courage, and she immediately got to work. But then the war came. And in a few weeks, the hard-working and intelligent, wealthy population of Aintab, as far as they were Christians, became defenseless, and a homeless flock of unfortunate refugees migrating to the south, to the desert, in hunger and misery and sheer poverty. Our Araxia was among them. I cannot say what grief struck me when I learned about this. Araxia on the deportation road. It took months, Röner later remembers, until she heard from Araxia again. When Araxia's first letter arrived, Beatrice Röner was already living in Aleppo, running an orphanage for Armenian children during the day and organizing relief for the concentration camps around Aleppo at nighttime. Röner would later recall that shouldering the double load of orphanage work and smuggling money and letters into the camps, as she says, far exceeded my physical and mental forces. But I knew one thing: there comes a gift from the God who is called a gift that perfectly fits the duty. We don't know for sure, but it is quite possible that Röner established contact with Araxia through her underground networks of volunteers going in and out of the camps. It is also very likely that Araxia used the same channels to send her letters to Röner in Aleppo. Whatever the way Araxia's letters found themselves to Röner in Aleppo, they were her only lifelines to the outside world during the summer of 1916. On reading these letters, there is no question, if there ever was one, about the genocidal intent on the parts of the Ottomans behind creating these camps in the desert of Syria. They shock with the brutality and indifference to life that, following Achille Mbembe, could only be described as death worlds, worlds where vast populations are subjected to conditions of life conferring upon them the status of living dead. Similar to what Primo Levi would later write about Auschwitz in Sequester in Ormo, Araxia's testimony about the Deir Zor camp, however, was not meant to elicit pity, but to impress on others the suggestion of a world not corrupt, but with a remote possibility of good. Like Primo Levi, Araxia offers the possibility that humanity perseveres through even the darkest times. Indeed, what is most striking about her letters is the visible absence of hopelessness from her narrative. Araxia knew, and so did her friend Beatrice Röner, that there was no more hope for survival in Deir Zor. The people we meet in the street hardly bear any resemblance to human beings anymore. Hunger has dried them to pieces, Araxia states simply. There's no longer any difference between rich and poor. If you went from door to door distributing donations, you could be sure of not having given needlessly. But a morning will follow this dark night, to be sure. God can only gain victory if he has faithful watchmen standing guard in the night, faithfully fulfilling their duty. May God use you and me as such. Rather than despairing cries for help from a fallen world, Araxia's letters unexpectedly offer hope, hope based on providence. It seems as though, having faced the inhuman, Araxia encountered the divine, she writes. Perhaps you're surprised at this cry for help, but in doing so, I'm not thinking of myself, but of the masses of children out there, crying out for bread, of the many pure young girls who, driven by hunger and hopelessness, seek refuge in the homes and at the hearth of Arab men, who are sold to those men for bread. The women, the mothers who in their despair search around for bread for their starving children. The young people, weakened by hunger, stumble around with the help of sticks, looking as aged as old people. The responsibility of having seen all of this forces me to write to you, Beatrice. Araxia then closes her letter and says goodbye. It's very difficult for me to read. With my best regards, I bid you farewell. God exists. He can make a rock into a spring. It should be easy for him to prevent the last deportation. In any case, we speak from the bottom of our hearts. Thy will be done. Her letter, and soon after her life, ends here. A scrap of paper written in flying haste brought me her final goodbye. They're taking me away. I say goodbye to you. In heaven we will meet again, Beatrice Röner tells us. Araxia is tortured, raped, and murdered by Ottoman government officials in the prison of Der Sor. She had been charged with distributing relief in Der Sor, where during the second phase of the Armenian Genocide, from July to December 1916, 192,750 Armenians were killed, and starved to death. She had distributed the help that her sister-in-God and friend Beatrice Röner had managed to smuggle into the camps of Der Sor. Many had depended on Araxia, not just for the food, but also for the spiritual guidance. Whereas numerous Armenians have been thrown out of spiritual balance by the downfall of their people, have lost their faith, and have begun to despair, her letters are beautiful examples of steadfastness, composure in the face of a horrible tragedy in its most gruesome form, a contemporary, the German consul of Aleppo at that time, wrote. Araxia left this world as a martyr. She had complete faith that what she had done on earth, she had done in the name of God. The life from which we expected so much, shattered so early, was it for nothing? Beatrice Röner asks in her homage to Araxia. How many times did she say with her shining eyes, "Oh, I only want one thing, live a life like Jesus"? At that time, she had no idea that she was called to become like him in death and die as a seed in the desert. When James Harris unveiled the plaque dedicated to Araxia at Woodbrook in 1925, the very one I found wandering around Woodbrook's library in 2016, exactly 100 years after she was murdered, he said, "The Armenian martyr roll is probably longer than that of any other Christian churches stitched together, and still it is being written. Among the multitudes of martyrs in Der Sor, no figure stands out clearer, more serene, more courageous, or with a brighter glow of victorious faith than that of our dear friend Araxia Jebijan." In the search for meaning, apocalyptic language is an important part of understanding the loss of life and sacrifice. We have seen this again during this current war in Karabakh. It gives those who remained behind and those who went from this world willingly a sense of providence, righteousness, and hope. Visions of a victimized and alienated elect, as evoked by Araxia, Beatrice Röner, James Harris, abound in apocalyptic literature. They lie at the heart of Christian origins. Many, whether in the East or West, experienced World War I as an important moment brimming with possibility and with hope. But it was also a moment of extreme darkness. making it easy for religious propaganda to exploit and feast on the anxiety-laden atmosphere in the trenches and at the home front. In the death camps of Der Sohr, the immoral hinterland to a war that made visible for the first time the dehumanization of the other, religion was both the vocalization of an embodied feeling that was not yet or no longer language, the one by which Araxia and others could say, I'm no longer afraid because I'm free, and reclaim their humanity. As I was reading Araxia's letters, I often wondered what made her letters stand out from the many other apocalyptic testimonies from World War I. I think it might be her Quaker background, the religious schooling that she has received at Woodbrook. The Quaker reading of the apocalypse differs from other Christian end-time prophecies. There's a realized eschatology in Quaker theology, a redemption during lifetime, which might have made it easier for Araxia to live through an experience that bordered on the unsayable and carry through with the responsibility she felt to be a witness. Reading her letters also reminded me of something Jean-Marie once wrote. His humanistic learning had failed him in Auschwitz, he once said. But there were those who remained unshakable, calm, and strong. At the mind's limits, this is his diary of Auschwitz, he explains, what I failed to understand at that time still appears to me as a certainty. Whoever is, in the broadest sense, a believing person, whether his or her belief be metaphysical or bound to concrete reality, transcends himself or herself. He or she is not a captive of his or her individuality. Rather, they are part of a spiritual continuity that is interrupted nowhere, not even in Auschwitz. And so it was with Araxia. God did not die in Der Sohr. Human rights did. In Der Sohr, being human and nothing but human was not enough. Genocide, we learn, is above all the redefinition of the relations between citizens and humans, the decision whose life carries political value and whose doesn't. We learn that not everyone has the right to have rights, and that to be human and to be treated in a humane way, one must also have political rights. We learn that these political rights can be taken away from anyone at any moment, and that contrary to our belief, human rights do not provide relief, nor can they be evoked when we no longer are members of a political community. Being human and nothing but human, in fact, is our greatest danger. The world found nothing, Hannah Arendt once wrote, sacred in the abstract nakedness of being human. Deep down, Araxia knew, like many witnesses do, that her testimony will not be received. In Night, his autobiographical account of Auschwitz, Elie Wiesel explains why. He writes, after all, it deals with an event that sprang from the darkest zone of man. Would we, he asks, whose worlds are premised on a belief in mutual support, solidarity, and permanence, understand how within that cursed universe the masters tortured the weak and massacred children, the sick and the old? But like him, Araxia dares us not to look away from the horror she describes. She recounts the stories of those who can no longer narrate themselves into being, so that we can mourn for them. The masses of children in Der Sohr crying out for bread, the many virgin girls who were sold to Arab men for a scrap of survival. The women, the mothers who in their despair searched for bread for their starving children and came back with dried grass. The young people who, weakened by hunger, stumbled around with the help of sticks and looked like old people. That child that went to sleep holding a piece of bread and with it a hope for tomorrow. I have read Araxia's letters countless times for many years. Still, the world she describes does not become less tragic, less evil. Sentences like, the people we meet in the street hardly bear any resemblance of human beings anymore. Hunger has dried them to pieces, are hard to forget. Reading them, I often wondered how they would change me, how they had already changed me, and what I should write about them and speak about them. And if so, how? Now please join me for a short silence and maybe some prayers for the lives that we lost. Thank you. Thank you, Misak. That was just on time. Thank you for listening. I'm open to any questions or anything that came up.
Could you tell us a few words about this song? Çöller is Turkish.
A lot of them they don't know.
I can.
It was few translations.
Well, Çöller is Karamanca or Çöller? Çöller.
Children are values.
Values. Okay.
So this comes, I can tell you a little bit about the context. This comes from, and maybe with the recording you can also send in the link of the website. So the story goes like this, that there was a blind poet on the deportation road that Armenians took from, for example, Aintab to Aleppo and then into the Syrian desert to Deir Zor. And he was sitting on the side of the road, but he was blind, so he couldn't see anything. So basically he just heard what people were saying while they were walking up to the camps, and most people knew that they would never return from these camps, and so he's speaking about their impressions. This is the only why for me this is so important. These are, as you can imagine, not just a few people survived Deir Zor. So this is actually, and they told us about it, and we don't have a lot of letters from Deir Zor. So Araxia's letters that I read to you, they're very, very unique. And this is also very unique because we hear how the people felt while they were going into these death camps. Yeah.
Can I just say that my grandfather survived Deir Zor as well. Was his three brothers and his mother. He was, I think, 7, and his younger brother was about 1. And at some point, his mother was so tired that she just left the small baby. But he went back. He knew his mother was exhausted. He went back and picked him up, 7-year-old, 1-year-old brother. And that's how he survived. And so when I was young, he used to tell me the stories of how he survived in Deir Zor. Some harrowing stories, including, where, I'm sorry to say, they had to, because the soldiers had animals, like horses and donkeys or whatever. And of course, there was excrement. And they were so hungry, they were sometimes having to look for small, undigested barley or something from the dung, sorry to say, for them to eat because they were so desperate. It's also, I think, worth remembering that it wasn't always like that, in the sense that at the start of Deir Zor, the marches, let's say, the deportations, people had some food with them.
Of course.
As the deportations continued, everybody got more exhausted, they ran out of whatever food they were able to carry with them initially, they ran out of whatever money they had with them, they were raided and things were stolen from them. So one thing that my grandfather was said that, he in a way wished that they just left them in Deir Zor or even in wherever. Because wherever they were taken or were being taken, even if they just stopped, wherever that might be, even in the desert, they would have survived. And the very fact that they were continuously having to move on, exhausting them.
That was the thing.
That was the difficulty.
Apparently there were 2 kind of trains at the end. One used to go to Aleppo and one to Deir Zor. If you're lucky, you're on the Aleppo train, then you can carry on. And if you are in Deir Zor, it's finished. It's the end of the road. But what I remember when I was young, because we were 3 girls, I was transferred to my aunt's house, which my grandmother used to live. And I was in the same room with my grandmother. And every night, the same time, he used to scream. And Geliyorlar, they are coming. And, and she never woke up. And she didn't realize, or my family didn't realize, how I suffered of that. I used to jump, wake up, try to sleep, and it was the history of my childhood when I was 4 and 5, and my grandmother screaming and shouting, they are coming. And believe it or not, I don't know, I wake up around 2 o'clock always. I think I go to toilet and this and that. I don't know if it's the same continuation of the thing that I still wake up, or it's just, it was going to happen. But I still, the scream, the shout, and in the family no one woke up. my aunt used to sleep, or the family used to sleep. No, but they were used to this, except me. Imagine for 5, 6 years old child, every night to wake up and then this screaming, shouting grandmother, you know. And I never talked about this. You know, I never said I don't want to sleep in the same room, because that was the only possibility. The other rooms were, my cousins were boys, and it was no way I could sleep in a different room by myself. I had to sleep with my friends. And although I didn't see, you know, but I suffered that all my childhood. And they are, geliyorlar means they are coming.
They're coming, yeah.
It was not the Turks in this case, they were the Kurds, actually.
The
They
Arabs,
used to come
yeah.
and,
Yeah.
you know, take whatever they had.
The
That's the
yeah.
story of my
Yeah.
childhood.
Wow, thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
It's called transmitting trauma or something?
it's
It's called transgenerational transmission of trauma. Yeah.
Someone once was criticizing my grandfather as to why, you know, he told me all those stories, because there are two trains of thought, you know. On the one hand, a lot of genocide survivors never spoke, because they were so traumatized, they never spoke with anybody for years. You know, they died without speaking anything about the horrors they experienced. But then there was the opposite, where people did speak, and maybe it was cathartic for them to speak, but they also at the same time passed that generational trauma.
But
There's no right or wrong.
But even if they didn't speak, they spoke.
Yes.
You know, because the grandmother would not know.
That's not true. I never told this story to my children.
Yeah.
I never ever told to my children, you know, that my grandmother used to scream, and that's why I wake up at 2 o'clock, you know, every day. My husband knew about it, and he used to come and cover me and do this, you know, but not my children. I never managed to talk to my children.
There's no right or wrong. I mean, if you're traumatized for whatever experience, whatever trauma it may be, there's no right or wrong when you pass that to somebody or you keep quiet about it.
The difference is, sorry, Mr. interrupting, the difference is this. According to me, if I was a Jewish mother, I would have made a big fuss about this and maybe talked and talked. For me, I believe in humanity still, and even massacre and all that. I always doubt if I have to go to that path and, you know, and all this, all that. I'm not sure which way to take it. Until now, I'm nearly 80 and I don't really know which one to take. I'm struggling.
Any questions, comments? Okay, well, let's close the formal part of your talk.
Of course.
Please do approach and speak with Suzan Meryem, I beg your pardon, informally. We also have some tablet for you as well to eat, not all that. Yes, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.
And of course, you must welcome to come back again. No applause.
Thank you.
To those who joined us online as well. And thank you to Suzan.
Absolutely. Yeah. And do email me with any, if you like to share stories or with any questions.
Yeah.